Hello and welcome to About the House. The Treaties Committee scrutinises all treaties that the Australian government proposes to enter into, including free trade agreements or FTAs. The committee's role is to make sure that proposed treaties are in the national interest, that they'll be beneficial and not detrimental for the Australian people. I sat down with Committee Chair Wyatt Roy and asked him how the process works.
Well, it's really important that we talk to people that the treaties affect. So the committee calls for submissions from as many people as we can possibly get. And some of our treaties, recently we've been looking at some free trade agreements, have had hundreds of submissions from farmers, from lawyers, from accountants, from people of all different backgrounds. So they provide their submissions. But particularly in this parliament, the committee has been travelling around the country, making sure that we're meeting these people in their businesses, in their workplaces, to see how that treaty might affect their industry or how they employ people or what effect that will have on our country. And I think that it's a really exciting process when a parliamentary committee and the sort of stale air of Canberra gets out into the wider Australian community and talks to real people about what we do here and how it affects their daily lives. I think in this parliament probably the most exciting treaties that we've been looking at are our free trade agreements. So we've had 3 big free trade agreements signed with our Asian neighbours. So the first one in South Korea, the second in Japan and the third with China. And we've already looked at the first 2 in Korea and in Japan, and I think this is a really exciting time for our country because we have a billion people coming into the middle class in Asia. They're going to want to continue to buy our goods and services, and by having these free trade agreements we have a new opportunity for Australian businesses to access those markets ahead of other countries. So in Korea, for example, our Australian beef farmers now have the same advantage that the Americans had going into that market, and that's a big deal for them. But also the consumable goods that those countries sell to us, so white goods or cars, will be able to come here cheaper, and Australian consumers can buy those goods at a lower price, which is sort of a win-win benefit out of these agreements. Biggest arguments against free trade agreements is that there's a preference for multilateral agreements, so agreements that have lots of countries involved in that process and all agreeing on the same thing. And I think that's a fair argument in the sense that that's a good and noble cause, but as you know, when you're dealing with lots and lots of countries, that negotiation process stalls a little bit, and it's much harder to achieve. So I would argue that by having a free trade agreement with one country, that is not a bad thing, because it helps that multilateral process, and we can have an advantage with that country that other countries can't have. So a good example is the Japanese Free Trade Agreement. The Australian-Japan Free Trade Agreement, or Economic Partnership, is the first agreement that Japan has ever had with a major agriculture exporter, which means Australian farmers have an advantage going into the Japanese market that no other country on earth has. So if you're an Australian farmer, you can get into that Japanese market in a way that nobody in the US or EU can possibly do. With our Chinese agreement, which the committee will be looking at hopefully this year, it's the first time that the Chinese government has really allowed 100% foreign-owned companies, in this case Australian-owned companies, to do things like financial services, legal services, education, aged care. And in that treaty we've developed a first-mover advantage. So if China was to sign a free trade agreement with another country or a multilateral agreement, those Australian businesses would get the same advantage as any other country. So I think I would argue back and say that just because we have a bilateral agreement doesn't mean that that disadvantages a multilateral agreement as well.
For more information about the Treaties Committee and the work it does, go to the committee's website.